Welcome back to a new episode of the Win More, Live Better podcast. And today I'm really excited because I'm joined by Dr. Paul Zach. And Paul is somebody that I've had on my radar for a while to be able to get on the show. And he's been incredibly gracious to give some of his time to have the conversation today. And I think as we kind of get into his research, his professional work, and just the different spaces that he's explored and dove into and now help leaders in different organizations thrive. I think he has just a lot to offer for those of you that have been tuning in and supporting the show for a while now. So more than anything, Paul, I just wanted to start by expressing gratitude to you because I've already taken a lot. So the fact that you're here having this conversation live with me, it means a great deal.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. I'm just a service dog. You just whistle and I come running.
That's perfect. I might borrow that. I feel like I've had moments in my career as well where you fall suit. We all have our time with that. More than anything, I was kind of sharing with you some of the work that I've done, but also the work I'm doing and kind of um, my framework, if you will, for how I try to help coaches and leaders just, not only win more, but live better and how do you ultimately thrive. And I think again, your work and research dives into that. But I think where maybe as a helpful starting point is your career arc, if you will, like you've dove into a lot of different like interrelated themes and different concepts you've explored pretty deeply on. Maybe for those that are less familiar with it, if you were to kind of give the overview of kind of the areas that you've really spent your life's work exploring and researching and studying and so forth, like what are some of those big themes that we can use as kind of the foundation pieces for this conversation?
Yeah, most of my work over the last 30 years, scientific research and the work I've done commercially has focused on developing knowledge and technologies so people can live longer, happier, and healthier lives. And I really like what you said in the beginning, Zach, that, performing at your best and living at your best, those are related often, right? Now, sometimes you can go too far on one or the other, but generally they run together. You're winning at something. You won a game, you won a big contract, you got a promotion. Do you come home exhausted or energized? Right. So I'm a big fan of the Rolling Stones. I was reading Keith Richards' autobiography, which is fabulous, by the way, just wonderful. And it's like a view through the Stones' eyes of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, like some crazy times in the US. But they talked about, after they do a performance, they can't go to sleep. They got to do stuff because they're so energized. I mean, you've sucked up all that energy from the audience. I feel the same way when I do a big keynote, right? I'm energized. I am putting it's like physically working out. I'm putting so much energy into, say, lifting weights that I'm energized coming out of that, right? I'm ready to rock. This is the best thing ever. So I think that's the way to think about how winning and thriving run together. And my particular area has been focused on the neurobiology of interpersonal interactions. So, recent research out of Oxford University showed that about 50% of people's happiness is due to the quality of their social relationships. Awesome. What's the quality of your friendships? Is it three? Is it seven? Like, we don't know. So, as you know, we've developed technology to actually measure the quality of relationships neurophysiologically and allow people to measure this really important component. Am I a good teammate? Am I a good partner, romantic partner? Am I a good parent? Am I investing enough in friendships? So I think one thing we see in the male female differential is women tend to have more friendships than men do. And so what we find is also, the higher rates of things like suicide in men because of loneliness. So, I mean, anyway, that's kind of the gist of it. I'll just stop there and take a breath.
I think that's actually so there what I was excited about is that like those that have followed this show, I've talked a little bit and given snippets of my coaching framework. I know I shared you a little bit of a snippet of it offline of how I really think that, outcomes for a leader, and you can replace outcomes with, that could be performance, that could be well-being, the fulfillment, joy, like whatever outcome you really want is really a product of one, their individual leadership ability, times the environment that they design or that they create, and then minus interference. When I hear you describe that, what I think is super powerful is those relationships matter for both sides of that equation. They matter for the individual, helping them thrive, but they also matter for those relationships that they're fostering and creating space for in the teams that they're leading or in the organizations that they serve. Your where my introduction to your work kind of started, I want to maybe start with the environment piece, but then I want to come back to the individual leader and like emotional fitness and that. For the environment piece, I could survey any coach in any sport. Everybody talks about the importance of relationships. Everybody talks about the importance of building trust. In your experiences, studying leaders, being around leaders and so forth, if you were to start to kind of break down what you found to be some of the most essential kind of building blocks to do those things effectively, what are those kind of from your lens?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back one step before answering that, which is um, something you and I know, but I think the general audience doesn't, which is when we look at the underlying human neuroanatomy, we are designed to work in groups. We evolved to work in groups. We are herd creatures. We want to be together with other humans, and we only thrive around other humans. And so it is not unnatural at all to put a bunch of people in an office building or in a stadium and have them work together and play together. Like it's just that's what we're set up to do. We're not lone creatures. Lot of animals are loners, and they spend most of their life alone. We don't. We need to be in groups. That's the first thing is we want to be in groups. So whenever you put humans together, even your family who you love, you're going to have some friction, right? So you mentioned trust, as you know, and the audience maybe doesn't. I did really the fundamental work on interpersonal trust during the early 2000s, and identified the kind of key neurochemical signals that say, "Oh, I should trust Zach. He seems like someone I can cooperate with, I can collaborate with, I can be a teammate with." And so think of trust as that lubricant against the friction. So um, so I spent a lot of time looking at the underlying neurochemistry of trust. Particularly, my lab was the first to identify this neurochemical oxytocin as this key signaling molecule. And we've looked at that in a variety of ways: what promotes oxytocin release, what inhibits it. And we can talk all about that, which I think is very relevant to sports performance. But also the environment is important, right? Um, there's this notion called psychological safety, how comfortable you feel in this environment. And most things in biology is sort of inverted U curve. If you're so relaxed that you're just not engaged, you're not going to perform well, right? So this is Zach, your brother-in-law, is just on the couch all day playing video games. Like, he needs more stuff to do. Like, he's got to get a life. That's not good. It's not good for thriving. It's not good for health, anything. But also, if you're overstressed, right? This is like the athlete who chokes, in the big game or whatever. So that's that kind of learning how to regulate that stress response is really important. That's why we overtrain athletes and surgeons and PhDs, and we get overtrained so that pilots, so that when you get into the stressful situation, you're just used to doing it. And so I think that's why training, coaches, and feedback are so important. So how do you get around that environment? So if you're a leader or a coach, you can create the social environment, a culture, if you will, that allows not only you, but the people around you, which is your success depends on them, right? To really be able to flourish. So, having a way to measure trust, which we've developed, and a way to, from a leadership perspective, change some of the way that people interact so that trust is higher, is really an important lever to improve performance, as you said, both at the individual and the organizational level. So, just a concrete example, I worked a lot with the online shoe and clothing seller Zappos in the early days. So the CEO of that company, Tony Hsieh, is sadly now passed away. Really wanted this really high performance but happy workplace, and so they would fund once a month block parties with music and food trucks and drinks. So why would you do that? Well, now I get to know people. So if I've talked to you about your kids and cute guys and girls and dogs and whatever, now I get to work and we're under stress. Like, well, I know more about you, right? I've built that foundation for social attachment. And so that to me is a smart investment in allowing individuals to build those strong connections so that when things do go wrong, which they inevitably will, you have the tools, you have the relationship in order to do that. So again, I'm a promoter of return to the office, at least 3 days a week, maybe more. Because if we're doing this online, yeah, I get to know you. If we talk every week or 3 times a week, we'll probably become friends. But if I see you in the office and we've had these random collisions and we talk about, I don't know, the stupid person who almost hit my car on the way to work, or my dog died, or whatever that is, it's not structured. It's that sort of natural environment that humans like.
One thing that you got me thinking about there is just the importance of fostering those connections, like in the margins, if you will. Like it's not just the structured meeting time that, yes, that can be a space for those to get nurtured and cultivated, but really what you're also describing is just those impromptu collisions. The other thing, there was a video clip, for those that are engaged in kind of sport, there was a video clip of it was Dwayne Wade, obviously a superstar basketball player, Miami Heat, NBA Finals MVP, and he shared a story about at the time when Pat Riley took over the Miami Heat team kind of midway through a season, and became the head coach. And like one of the first things he did is he talked about how he started asking guys how well they knew their teammates, like how well they knew their family, how well they knew their kids, like how well they knew, their parents, and just like the people that they were there showing up every day. And this conversation came up recently with me and a colleague where we were talking about like it's one thing if I, see you and I have a conversation about like, hey, how's your family? It's a deeper level of connection if I can say like, hey, how's so and so? Like your wife, and I describe her name or their kids, or I ask them something about, hey, how did the latest T-ball game go, or whatever the case might be. In your research in those, what have you seen, and or whether it's research and or in the applied experiences that you've had being around some of these high trust organizations, like what are the things that they do that not only foster that extend beyond just that surface level connection, and are there even neurological differences there?
Yeah, it's a great question and a big question. Um, so let's start out with a couple things. One, if you're a leader at any level within your family, of a team, of a organization, if you're not acquiring, so my view is if you're a leader, you're an information aggregator, right? You're going to get all this information, you're going to process it, you have a plan, strategic plan, you're going to use that information to improve your performance. So if you're not picking up the emotional information from the people around you, you're losing out on a huge amount of valuable intel that you can use to make better decisions. So in the brain, emotions are how experiences are assessed for value, right? So if I talk really soft and it just says just implicitly says it's not very important. If I'm putting energy in this conversation, like, okay, this is hot, we're gonna go, this is gonna be really fun, right? You can see that. So you probably had this experience too. When I walk into organizations I'm working with, if you see the employees and their shoulders are slumped and they're kind of shuffling along, you're like, man, this is not a fun place to be. Like these people need help versus people like they're people walking fast, they're talking fast, they're like, "Hey, oh, Paul's out. Yeah, glad you're here. Okay, good. I gotta go, but I'll see you at 10 o'clock." And you're like, "Okay, these people are hitting the ball out of the park a lot, right? So this is fun." So from a leadership perspective, again, I don't want to get involved in people's personal lives only to the extent that it's important for human connection, right? So um, the one way to do that I found very effectively as a leader is to use an adjective. So instead of walking to work and saying, "Hey, Zach, how are you going?" I can say, "Hey, Zach, you look happy, sad, worried, tired," right? And now I've opened up that emotional channel. So I'm just going to probe you a little bit for information. And it ensures to that direct report that I see him or her as a human being and not as human capital, which is a terrible, terrible phrase. We should just excise it from our language. You're not a machine. You're not replaceable. You're a human. If you're a human, you have good days and bad days. You have emotions, which are very important. Emotions are how we put energy into this. In fact, I read somewhere recently this wonderful term: work involves emotional labor. right? If you give a crap about what you're doing, you got to get excited about it, right? So if you're not excited about it, you should probably look for a different job. And so I think as a leader, I want to enable that emotional labor, that passion, that energy. And this is where sports comes into it in a very effective way. How do I build those bonds between those individuals so that we can have this shared passion? Stress, right? So we're coaches are pushing us hard to our physical limit and our emotional limit, right? You can't, you know, play at the high levels in any endeavor unless you are emotionally committed to what's going on, right? So I spent a lot of time working with the U.S. military, and the training for SEALs. Once you do the minimal physical stuff, the rest is all mental. Just take one step after the next. You're cold, it sucks. Turn it off. You can do it. Just keep going. So same thing for elite athletes. Everything's going to hurt, right? Everything always hurts. For people in working in offices, it hurts when you're under stress. It hurts when you're under deadline. It hurts when you've worked long hours. And so you as a leader have got to kind of manage that. That's a good thing because it bonds your team together. Again, on that inverted U curve, you want to go so far that now you're inhibiting people's ability to perform now and also causing burnout. And so again, I think I'm a tool guy, right? So I'm going to make tools, and we've made tools typically will manage not only that high level of stress. Again, I need that emotional commitment. I need that energy and passion in order to perform at my best. I want to be on the peak of that inverted U curve. I don't want, and I might push you beyond that peak sometimes. So sometimes you just have to suck it up. It's uncomfortable to hit high performance. But then I got to come back and let you recover, right? So the brain again is just like working out a muscle. Stress recovery gives you the ability to go beyond that kind of peak performance level when you have to, just to hang in there for I don't know, 20 inning game, or double overtime in football, or whatever that is.
The term, psychological safety, I remember when it was kind of starting to become a little more mainstream and get touched on. And I think also in hindsight and reflection, there were like some misunderstandings around it, or sometimes it's misunderstood. And I think particularly like in the coaching world, one of the chain, part of it is, how do you create space for people to be seen and heard and valued, and also, allow people that space to, psychologically take risk and so forth. And what I also found some coaches struggling with is like they were like, well, does that mean I can't like challenge people? Like, or like, do I have to be really sensitive to making sure like can I still have high expectations and things like that? In your work and research, how have you seen, just again, the role of those expectations and that challenge and that stress that you were describing, like that is actually a performance enhancer and not something that um, you have to be overly sensitive to from a standpoint of it's going to actually diminish trust or anything like that.
Yeah, I think it's creating that environment where the direct report, the athlete, is comfortable pushing to failure, right? When you're weightlifting, you want to push to failure, right? So you want to do the same thing from an emotional perspective. I want to push you to failure where you've gone as far as you can. Why would you do that? Because then you can extend the range of failure, right? I have to build up this ability to use my, frontal cortex, my cognitive abilities to push beyond that level of uncomfortableness. And you can only do that, particularly in practice, by just doing something over and over. So it's really creating that environment where if you fail, you're not getting yelled at. Again, I might encourage you. I might have a discussion how we can get better. I certainly want to praise in public, but critique in private. That's really what the research shows, right? You're missing the mark. Okay, come off the field, or come talk to me in practice, or come to my office if we're working in an office, and let's talk about why you're missing your milestones. Let's work on changing things up. But if we want people to excel, we have to also allow them to fail, right? If everyone's doing the average, then you're going to get average behavior. You're not going to get extraordinary behavior. And one of the factors that's well established in the neuroscience literature is that public, social derogation, or particularly public social derogation. I'm yelling at you in public. It has not only a activation in the pain areas of the brain, it's longer lasting than physical pain. So if I'm going to get yelled at for failing because I try to do something different, what's my brain telling me? Oh, pain's bad. Don't do that thing. Do the safe thing. Hit singles all day, right? I don't want to try a home run. I get yelled at when I strike out. So again, we have to allow people to push that. Training is really important. But again, I think of this as brain training, not just physical training. My other pet peeve, can I do a pet peeve? Muscle memory. Who made that up? It's just memory. It's in your brain. This isn't muscles. Your muscle do just following what your brain tells it to do. So forget that term muscle memory for listeners. It's just memory. So doing something over and over. And when that is so over practiced that you can just perform at your best. So quick example. I do a lot of hiking with my dogs out in the country by myself. And I live in Southern California. So what happens in Southern California is in the fall, the mountain lions, which are, living here, their range extends because they're running out of food. And so I'm prepared for this. I thought eventually I'm going to run to a mountain lion. I have a plan. The dog will distract him. I have a weapon, whatever. And yeah, sure enough, I was hiking pre-dawn a couple years ago, and I saw this coyote on a hill above me. And about to let my dog off the leash and go run up in the hills. And this coyote gets into a crouch and moves forward towards me. And then your brain's going, "Oh, that's a weird coyote behavior. I've seen lots of coyotes." Like, and it was just pretty. It was dark. I hadn't even turned on my flashlight. I was walking in the dark, and I'm like, "Holy shit, that's a mountain lion in a crouch, in a ledge above me." Like, but I had trained for this for 20 years. I had a plan. I knew what to do. I stay big for a mountain lion. Anyway, it all worked out just fine. I slowly backed up. I kept looking at that animal. It kept looking at me. It didn't pounce on me, luckily. But I realized when I got back to the parking lot, no stress response. I was on, I was focused, let me tell you. But there was no fear. It was just like I had practiced this in my brain so many times, and I have a concealed carry permit. So I had my gun with me. I put, tens of thousands of rounds to that gun. I know how to use it very effectively. And so I was like, oh, that was weird. So I think that's what we want for clutch players in business, on the field, is I've done this thing so many times. I've failed so many times. I've figured out how to optimize from those failures that now I can actually perform when I really need to without being overly worried about it. And by the way, sometimes your performance is going to go badly. In the clutch moment, everyone's going to fail, right? No one bats 1,000. So, um, I think, again, from a leadership perspective, back to your question, I've got to create this environment where you can innovate at the most, innovate when you need to, and autonomy is one of the factors we found as well, right? I've got to give you the freedom to do your own thing. So even if I'm a coach and I'm showing you how to hold the bat, again, that coach knows a ton, right? But that player may hold it slightly differently, right? So and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe for that person it's a little bit different. So everyone's different, and from a leadership perspective, if you direct anybody, they're going to have good days and bad days, and they don't even know they're good days and bad days. They're going to underperform, and sometimes they're going to overperform. And I think that's where you need to give them feedback. Hey, I think you're underperforming. Have you slept well? What's your nutrition like? And even from my work in the lab, when I see my graduate students and postdocs who are underperforming, I'm watching them, right? And everyone has a bad day, no big deal. But 2 or 3 bad days in a row, we should have a conversation. And what's going on? Is your family okay? Are you getting enough rest? Are you exercising? So I think it's really the literature, just to finish this thought, is really a fivefold set of factors that are strongly related to thriving. And diet, exercise, sleep, we know all that. The fourth is this rich social connection, which I mentioned before. So if you see employees or players who are not engaging with others, who are loners, not really good from an emotional health perspective. And the fifth is having a sense of purpose and acting on it, right? So that purpose, often I call it transcendent purpose. Why am I on the planet? What am I doing that makes me feel good, like being a human, on this side of the ground? And so when people have a sense of purpose, they're really motivated. That purpose could be help my team win, help my organization perform better. That's totally fine. It could be I want to be a great tennis player in my spare time, just fine, or volunteer at my kid's school.
Mm, mm. I think I got multiple avenues that I'm like, oh, this could be good to go down here. When I hear you describe the the psychological safety piece, the challenge, and the like. One of the things that you mentioned there is just the getting to those moments of quote unquote high pressure and not allowing. One of the ways I framed it for players is like getting to a space where you're not allowing the anxiety of the situation override the trust you've built in your preparation, right? Like, and that's like what I kind of hear you in essence describing with that, and like how as leaders we can obviously play a very facilitative role in how we design the environment to train our players for that. Not just in the physical context, but what I also hear you describing is in like that mental and emotional piece as well, which I think is really impactful. I want to I want to stay for just one or two more questions on this, kind of relationships around organizations and trust for a moment, and then I want to really dive more into like the emotional fitness for you. In your work, you've found some kind of core levers for our building blocks, if you will, for trust. And I know we don't have to go into all of them per se in great detail, but I'm going to ask probably an unfair question in a sense, but it's like, which are the ones that you feel like are like, hey, if there's one to two things that a leader can immediately kind of implement or be more intentional with to really build a higher trust team in your work, which ones do you feel like are really, what are the ones that you've seen and are standing out for high impact leaders?
Yeah. So this I wrote a book in 2017 called Trust Factor that identified 8 foundations for organizational trust that directly improve organizational performance using multiple measures. For each organization is actually a bit different. That is, we developed a tool to measure those 8 factors, and you get the biggest impact on trust and therefore performance by intervening on the lowest one. And they have the acronym oxytocin. Magically, somehow, it's worked out. So the O is for ovation. So from a brain perspective, what is rewarded, what is valued by your community is established as a default pathway, something we want to repeat. And so we found in the neuroscience that when someone meets or exceeds a goal, if they're recognized within a week of that, after a week from the brain perspective, it never happens. If you're right away, so I'm giving you constant feedback. If that feedback is public, it's personal, it's tangible, it is comes from peers. It's really important. So we as a community go, oh, we really value you as a high performer. So there's sort of constant feedback, and it's got to be about you. So you hit a really important goal, Zach, and I know you love coffee. And so our next team meeting, I bring a nice basket of fancy coffee and mug and whatever, and then I recognize what you did and share that with the group. So that does a couple things. One is it reinforces your behavior, but it also tells the group, hey, we value high performers. In our community, high performance is really important. So I think that's one of the ones that's the easiest to implement because it's that constant feedback and it's public and it can happen every week. So let's think about who this high performer is. Um, uh, the unexpected is really important for the brain. So, the employee of the month parking place, that's just a stupid idea. Maybe that's not stupid, but it's not going to help you perform better because, you know, um, anything could happen, and it's going to move around. It's too little, too late. But if we say, hey, look, we want to, you know, improve your batting average, or we want to improve your ability to close contracts when we're doing sales, or whatever that is. Um, giving people stretch goals is really good for the brain. The brain loves to have this challenge. I'm a pro stress person. I'm sure, like you are. We need stress to perform at our best. Now, it's challenge stress. I don't want to put you under chronic stress. That's bad. But having a challenge for the next week or the next month, oh, that's great. And then getting feedback on how I'm reaching that challenge, that's a kind of a servant leader model or a coaching model to improve performance. So I think the easiest is this ovation. Just again, publicly recognized high performers cost so little. And I've worked, as you know, a lot with the military and police, and they will say like, oh, "I don't really recognize this. Did my job." Yeah, but you did it damn well. Like that's awesome. So I can just pull that out. Hey, Sergeant Smith, man, he was out 36 hours, and he held that post. It was uncomfortable. Man, he's kicking ass. We should all be as good as him. That's all you need, right? Right. So now we're saying, okay, this is what it takes sometimes to be the best at what you're doing, and our community recognizes that. The second, I think, would be autonomy, right? So once you are trained, I've got to let you do your own thing. Every situation you're in is going to be a little bit different. So if as a leader, I'm micromanaging you, I don't know all the knowledge you have as a frontline worker or team member, right? You have to actually do those micro adjustments so you can perform your best. So ovation and autonomy, I would say, would be the top two.
Mm, mm. I I want to go into so like over the last few years in particular. I mean, well, it's even extends beyond, but I think, more recently with some of your more recent publications, you're really diving into the science of like I like not just living better, but like thriving, really, and I think that's again the whole premise of this show is like I could again survey any coach. They all want to win more generally, and yet, as you mentioned at the very beginning, those two things don't have to be mutually exclusive, and I think sometimes the demands of the coaching profession certainly I think can make the latter challenging for some, or we can kind of create bad habits, or we can just, create lives that make that harder than it needs to be. So I'm interested when you kind of really dive into this work and the work around like emotional fitness too. I kind of want to just start with like your own interpretation of it because I think we hear that those terms emotional fitness and mental fitness and so forth, and I think some of this can be you hear different iterations. Let's just kind of start with like what those mean in through your lens with what you've studied and what you've learned, and then we can kind of build into like, okay, now as a coach or as a leader, how do we design for that? How do we create more space for those things?
Yeah, that's the key question. Unless we can define it and measure it, we can't really do anything with it. So over the last 20 years or so, we did research originally funded by Department of Defense and other agencies that tasked us with identifying combinations of signals in the brain that would accurately and consistently predict what people would do after a message or an experience. So the idea was to equip warfighters with this new superpower called persuasion. How do we communicate in the most effective way to influence someone's behavior? So as we did this work, we almost incidentally identified how the brain values social emotional experiences. So what is valued by the brain is what is acted on and remembered. And so doing all this work and doing this, 10,000 blood draws measure changes in neurochemicals and, high frequency neurophysiology, the brain works 1,000 times a second. So lots of data. We eventually found this network that I'm going to use one bad word that one of our when we built software, so everyone could use this. But someone called it one of our subscribers called this the give a shit network, and that's exactly right. From a brain perspective, the brain is so energy hungry that when we see this big investment in the metabolic processing of the experience, it goes, "Oh, this is so valuable. I'm going to put a lot of energy into really understanding and processing this information, as opposed to kind of just idling." And so that's that kind of appropriate level of arousal if I can create that experience that the organism finds sufficiently valuable. So once we found that and we were able to create technology to measure this, the sort of natural question came out, which is, well, how much um, of these high value experiences do you need to thrive? So for me, thriving means you have high energy and positive mood. So because this is a 1 second frequency neuroelectrical data stream, so we ran studies where we just measure this for months, and we can relate that to your self-report on your energy, on your mood, whether you're sick, whether you're healthy, what activities you're doing, and we discovered that. Think of this as a sort of wiggly time series. That if you have enough of these big peaks in your day, that you're very likely to be thriving. Again, positive mood, high energy, you're engaging with people. But 80% of these high value moments are social. So again, you're not wrapped up on in your couch, with your video game controller. You're out doing stuff. You're expending energy, right? You're emotionally engaged in life. And the answer turned out to be six. Six of these well-defined high value peak metabolic investment moments. So this network that values social emotional experiences I named immersion, because you sort of get sucked into these high value experiences. It's like being sucked into a pool of water. So it's a combination of signals. I had to give it a name because, it doesn't exist in nature, or we did unnatural things in natural data to create this. And so we created a free app called Six, which you can find in the App Store and the Google Play Store. It's free for anybody. And we pull signals from the cranial nerves by applying algorithms to smartwatches. So I think of emotional fitness as the steps for the 21st century, right? If I'm a healthy human, I am engaged enough in people and in life that my brain is actually investing these high value experiences. So the analog might be, maybe steps is not the best analog, but it's like I can do, 100-yard, I can do 10 100-yard sprints in the course of half an hour. That'd be a nice level of physical fitness, right? You could sprint at, I don't know, 25 seconds or faster for 100 yards. That seems like a pretty good measure. So this is another measure of emotional fitness. Are you actually doing those things that feed your brain those important social emotional experiences so that you maintain your ability to be a fully developed human being?
And just to make sure I'm hearing you right, when you describe those six, could you like for those listening, if they're like, all right, I want to know, like, okay, well, what are these again? Can you kind of break those down?
So they're personal. That's the beauty thing about having doing an app to do this.
Mm.
What's important to you is not important to me, and vice versa. Right. So again, 80% of those are social. Maybe a concrete example, Zach. So I was on a podcast in the UK a couple of weeks ago, talking about emotional fitness, and the podcast host downloaded our app, used it all day, and we're chit chatting before we record, and he goes, "Hey, by the way, I used your app today, and I didn't get any key moments, and so I think your app sucks." And he goes, "And about half an hour ago, before I got on with you, my little 3-year-old son jumped to my lap and gave me a hug, and I felt my watch vibrate. I got a key moment." So there you go, right? So that's
Mm.
kind of face validity that of these key moments. What's interesting is the app connects to your calendar and your location. So every day you'll see where those key moments are, who you're with, what you're doing. So for me, I write every day. That's a big part of my job, right? Creating research and magazine articles and whatever. And I will get key moments by myself writing because I like the constructiveness of writing, having everything fit together and the words flow and having a rhythm, and it's like a little game for me, which I love. So I'll get a key moment doing that. But most of those are being on Zooms, being in person is better, obviously. If I go to a conference, I'll get, 6, 7, 8, 9 key moments. So again, it's like return to office. We need to be around the humans, but to have an objective measure and a metric that allows you to go, oh, here are the things that I should be doing if I'm not getting enough set of key moments. And so I think that's, the culmination of, most of my professional life is creating this free technology. And sadly, I don't care about money. I'm trying to get 1 billion people on the planet to use this free app. So we have a language and a tool to talk about emotional fitness in a non-clinical way. It's not mental health. It's a different ballgame. Even though these data do predict sort of pre-depressive symptoms like low mood and low energy with 98% accuracy, it's really to focus on not even wellness. Wellness is too low a threshold for me. I want you to thrive. Wellness just means you're not sick. That's table stakes. How about living your best life? Well, what should I be doing? What should I not be doing? And that's really what this culmination of all this laboratory work and work with clients has led to.
Man, you have my own mind kind of spinning in a sense because I'm like, oh, I feel like, even just doing this podcast, I'd be so interested to know, like, I feel like these conversations for me would very much, in theory, I feel like they would very much be one of those kind of key moments in a day because I enjoy asking being curious and asking these questions because one, they're helping me connect dots in my own life, but also two with those that I serve. And so I think that's um, so interesting to me. And I think it makes me kind of think of like coaches that I know, like in conversations that I've had of like helping them identify what are those kind of peak moments in their day. And like you mentioned the social piece of it and how so many of them are going to be rooted in that. So where I'd be interested to like go for a moment in the sporting world, you hear a lot of people talk about, the importance of like team connection and the relationships amongst the staff, but then like there's questions sometimes amongst coaches of like, how intentional do we need to be as a staff to like create an environment for our players to be connected or to spend time with one another or to just create space. Wh- how would you frame the argument around being deliberate as a leader, as a coach, to um, when you're designing the environment or the culture for your team to build it around that human connection? How important would you say that that is?
I would say it's essential to winning. Um, what we found in published scientific research is that when that trust is high, friction is low, people are working like a superorganism, which you need a team to do. We see direct physiologic synchrony. In other words, brains are working almost identically. And the app actually shows this. I'm going to give you a visual. So that's just a friend of mine who's not physically with me here, but I'm he's in uh, green and I'm in purple. And you can see our brains in real time are doing different things. We're in different experiences. But when we see that superorganism, that team working together, you see these circles almost perfectly overlapping. And so now I have a metric to assess team cohesion, which is neurologic. It's real time. I can ask, hey, if I do this thing as a coach, does it improve or diminish team cohesion? If I have if we have a barbecue at the stadium on a day off and we bring our families, does that improve or diminish team cohesion? Right. So, um, to take a concrete example of that, I was at a conference some years ago, many years ago, in Louisiana, in New Orleans, and I'm a healthy guy. I'm working out, so I'm Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock. I'm in some you know 100-year-old gym in New Orleans. It's got 6 floors and medicine balls and the old gyms. No one's there. I'm working out. Who walks in? A whole ton of tall people. It's the Lakers with Phil Jackson. They had a game that evening in New Orleans, and they were getting in a light workout. They're trainers, and literally, I was like 3 people in the gym besides them. So at some point, I got to go over and say hi to Phil Jackson, which I did. It was very nice, and chatted with a couple of the trainers. And this is when Shaq and Kobe were on the team, and I noticed no Shaq, no Kobe. So I asked one of the trainers, I'm like, "What's the deal?" Like, "Oh, no, they don't work out with us. They have their own trainers and they will not work out together. We have reserved the gym at these separate times for them to be by themselves." Now, that I understand, these guys are the best of the best. But from a team perspective, I wouldn't let that happen. No, we're a team. We're a superorganism. We're going to kick it together. You got to be here. We're all be here together. We flew on the plane together. You can't take your private jet, Kobe. I'm sorry. You're going to fly in the plane with everybody else. So I think either you're a team, you're not a team. Now, maybe there are exceptions. Maybe I'm not smart enough. Maybe I'm not in the industry like you are. But if I was Phil Jackson, I would say, you can be part of the team. You're part of the team. You can't be halftime in the team, right? These are your teammates. You should know them. And as you said, Zach, I should know your spouse's names. I should know how many kids you have. I should know what's good and bad in your life. Not because I want to pry, but because I want to help you perform at your best. And if I'm going to be a great leader, I've got to know about you holistically. Because if you had a giant fight with your wife that morning, you're not going to perform at your best. You're just not, because you're burning bandwidth that is not being focused on performance. So if I can say, check in and go, hey, you don't look like you're all focused here. Yeah, I had a bad morning at home, and okay, great. Go run some laps, go whatever. I can think of lots of things I can do to help that player or that employee, gain that level of emotional fitness. And the adjective is the key, right? Look for those little emotional tells. I'm sure you do this all the time in your work, and I'd love to hear how you do it. But it's really being plugged in on a personal level that this is what this person needs right now in order to form this superorganism that I need to perform at its best.
It's such a great point. Like that antenna, you have that antenna. And I think like really good coaches, really good connectors have that like it's maybe beyond even EQ, but just that ability to kind of like you mentioned, be observant of what somebody's saying, what they're not saying as well, how their mannerisms and body language is showing up in comparison to like those day-to-day patterns. And also too, like I think you shared this earlier with like your students. It's one thing if it's a one-off. it's another thing now if this is starting to become a pattern or starting to become something that's more observed. So I really like that. I know even I just I always this is me going on my own little soapbox for a brief
You go for
moment,
it.
but I just think it's so common in organizational settings when you have like we call them drive-bys, like you have these just daily drive-bys with people or these very brief interactions and how superficial some of them can be and just how you can hey, ask how somebody's doing and yet like do you even really take the time though to ask them even a follow-up to that of like take the time to like listen to what they say and then ask a follow-up or to your point notice how they're showing up today versus usual, and maybe that creates a space for you to ask, and you might be the first person to actually ask. Because there's also that feeling for some where it's like they notice someone's off, but they're like, "Ooh, I don't want to say anything. I don't want to be wrong either." And so I think I'm encouraged by some of the research you've done and some of the work that you're sharing here because I think it invites all of us to really like lean into that connection, not just because of I think it's part of being a good human being, but also because it is a performance lever enhancer for all of us.
Yeah, I think you're right to be observant. I don't know if you have kids, but when my kids are little, I could always tell when they needed to pee, like they get a little bit wiggly and they're like, no, I don't need to pee. I'm like, no, you got to go pee. I just know. So you have to learn how to read those people. The downside of this for a leader is that you do have to get involved in people's lives occasionally, right? I had a student who was suicidal and I had to get involved. I have had people who had, terrible life experiences. I had to get involved. But I'm invested in human beings, not in human capital. These are people who are I love in the philia sense. I really truly am invested in them as humans, and if they need my help, I should be helping them, right? So again, I can't take all my time to do something, but I can plan in advance. That this is something acute that has to be solved. What's really important is that also the rest of the organization sees that, hey, if I'm really in crisis, my leader's there to bail me out. This person really cares about me. And the world's a super small place, right? People go other places, but I've had a lot of former PhD students of mine, go to the big tech companies, and I always write great letters for them. Like I want them to go thrive. And by the way, now I know a guy at Google or Meta that I can call up and do a project with. They're like, it's a small world, so these high performers are rare. But even just being a good human being, so it was certainly harder for me, and in general harder for men when they're younger to have those emotional channels. So we've shown that high levels of testosterone inhibit our ability to be empathic, to read those emotional signals. We've done, as you know, testosterone administration studies and makes men not only take more risk, try harder, but they're less cooperative. They're not as nice to other people. They're overly optimistic, and they're sort of little mini gods. And I'm sure in the world you're in, the elite athlete world, you see these mini gods because their testosterone super high. On the other hand, testosterone also has diurnal variations. It varies for lots of reasons, and as you get older, it gets easier to let in those tells, if you will, emotional tells. So I think, yeah, I mean, mental fitness, emotional fitness, whatever you call it, it's essential to really thriving, but also for organizational performance. And so once we have a way to talk about it in a non-scary way and measure it, then why I don't optimize on that dimension? Just makes no sense to me at all.
I want to kind of be mindful of your time. I want to kind of come down to the last. I have a last couple of questions here that I'd love to pose, but this first one, there's probably a little bit of redundancy to this with what you shared earlier, but I think the point is worth really emphasizing because what I'm hearing you describe is like neuro, and you can correct me, please, but from a neurobiological standpoint, like there is differences in the brain when somebody feels deeply cared for versus when they don't. And I'm interested, like if you were to kind of or explain that from what you've seen, what you've researched, like what is really different in the brain when somebody truly feels that sense of like deep connection with somebody and a sense of like, hey, this other person is invested in me. They care about me. Like again, I know this is like kind of diving in a little bit to like the science piece of it per
Yeah.
se, but like I think it really does illustrate just how impactful this is.
Yeah, I think the leadership um, dichotomy is I can lead by fear or lead by love, right? So fear, has well-known pathways in the brain, and we actually acclimate to fear pretty quickly. So again, there's only so much you can do with people to push them. Again, I do want to push you as a coach or as a leader to push you beyond maybe what you think you can do. So I give you that ability to extend your capabilities. But we look at leading by love, right? You'll die for people you love. Right? I love my kids, but I hold them accountable, right? I tell them when they've done something wrong. At least in my opinion, they've done something wrong because they need feedback because they're young. They haven't been on the planet as long as I have. So from a biological perspective, that leading by love means connection. I want to perform for my coach. I want to perform for my leader. I'm largely driven by two neurochemicals, dopamine and oxytocin. So, from a leadership perspective, to induce the brain to release these, first, I've got to be attentive, right? I'm going to be focused on you, right? And I want you to be focused on me. I want to be fully present, not be distracted. That's the dopaminergic response. But the second is, I want to make sure that you know I want the best for you, right? Now, I worry about the superorganism too. The organization has got to thrive, or the individuals also all lose their jobs or whatever. Things are bad. But on a one to one basis, I'm invested in you as a human being. So now we have this brain synchronization I talked about, again, driven by dopamine and oxytocin that we can measure with the 6 app. That I go, oh, we are formed. I'm part of your support team. I'm going to push you. I'm going to push my kids. I push my kids to do better in school, right? That doesn't mean I don't love them and want the best for them. So I say the same thing to my graduate students I say to my children, which is because I care about you, I'm trying to get you the hell out of my house lab so you can go flourish on your own. But for now, my job is to push you, to guide you, to help you be better than you think you can be because I have a sense of your capabilities because I've been doing this for a long time. I've had over 100 PhD students in my lab. I have a pretty good sense now of what people can do, and I love to be wrong on the low side. Like I have a student now who I kind of just picked up and didn't seem like a great student. Like, he'll finish the PhD. This kid, I've pushed him hard and he has performed extraordinarily well. Cha Shang is his name. So if you're listening, Cha Shang has just overperformed and I'm so proud of him. I've told him that he's going to have a hell of a career. He's an extremely nice person. I just didn't know him very well and he's foreign, so I couldn't read the cues quite as well. He really surprised me and he's become a real leader in the lab. And so you see this kind of flowing down. Once I have this high performer and he or she is getting that kind of attention from the leader, it begins to flow down. Again, I'm setting these high expectations. I'm going to push you. And I always tell my students the same thing I tell my kids. At some point, you're going to kind of hate me because I'm trying to get more out of you that I think you can do. And you just want to stop because you're tired and you just want to finish your PhD or you want to graduate high school, whatever it is. But I think you have more in you. And I'm going to keep pushing you to reach that. Again, not every day, not screaming at you. I'm going to work on a systematic plan to help you reach a level that you never thought you could achieve. But I've seen people just like you achieve it. I'm going to work with you as a team. And also, you're going to have some bad days. And then we'll rest and recover on some days. That's important too, emotionally.
Feel like with that example, although the context was different, I could have replaced some of what you were describing. I could hear a coach talking to a player in what you just described. Like that was such a really great example of conversations that I think a lot of really great coaches have with players, right? Sometimes it's helping them see themselves and what they're capable of, even beyond maybe what they think. And part of that, again, as we've talked about a few times, like stress is okay. Like we can
Right.
have high challenge. Like high challenge and high support is actually a really valuable combination for us to enhance our performance, both at an individual level, a collective level, and so on. And so I think it's been kind of cool to hear how this comes full circle in so many different contexts. And again, that's why I was really just eager to talk shop with you, just because I know maybe there's been less emphasis in your work in the sporting realm, but I'm like, man, this is just so relevant and transferable that I think more coaches and leaders in the realm of sport need to hear this. Um, which kind of brings me my last question here, and uh, this could either be something that you've already kind of touched on and you can build off of it, or if there's anything that you feel like maybe we haven't hit on yet that would be really beneficial. But like, if there's a coach listening to this who, hey, if there's one to two things that you would prescribe or recommend to increase their emotional fitness, right? If they're like, hey, I'm really inspired by this conversation and I want to like kind of actively kind of apply some of this or find some low hanging fruit that I call it a Tuesday rule is my rule. My rule is if I give a talk or I do any sort of workshop, if you can't immediately apply it this coming Tuesday, and Tuesday is just arbitrary, then I haven't done my job. Like I want things to be practical and easy to implement and so forth. So from your vantage point in all this, emotional fitness for leaders, there's one or two things that you would advise to start with or prescribe, what would you suggest?
Yeah, and we are seeing an increasing number of professional sports teams use our technology to actually measure and track emotional fitness. Are we actually looking at those temporal variations? Um, what we're finding is that the days you're not performing, people tend to have the highest level of emotional fitness. So they're recovering. So that recovery is really important. So I think there's maybe two takeaways. One is stress and recover from an emotional perspective. So you had a long game, you had a stressful game, you got to give that person that little trough to kind of recover. And I think that's kind of well known. But the second is really this social connection, right? Don't be the Shaq and Kobe who refuses to be part of the team. You are in this superorganism. Your family's a superorganism. Your friend group is a superorganism, and that team's got to be a superorganism, whether it's a sports team or a team in a business. And so think about how to facilitate that sense of strong connection. Let's have, so it's super common in Silicon Valley to have last Friday pizza and beer. We're just going to have pizza and beer on site. Why would we do that? Hanging out, get to know each other, right? So again, in sports, you have a lot of you have travel time, you have a lot of time together to do that, but make sure that people are really having the sense to get to know each other. And there's some facilitated ways you can do that. Share one thing that you haven't told your spouse. Talk about the most exciting thing that happened to you when you're 10 years old, right? These abilities to be vulnerable is very compelling, and a coach can do that himself or herself can start with that. So that social connection, which really opens up vulnerability. And now I really understand that person on that emotional level. So for listeners, don't be afraid of the word emotion. Emotions are a physiologic signal of something's level of importance. And if you want to get high performance, that emotional component is essential. It's not going to happen just with the physical, as if you're a robot with no emotional state. You actually have to love this thing you're doing, and you got to love the people you're working with. When I work with the military, particularly the special forces group, the number of times those guys use the word love is extraordinary, right? So you got to love the people you're working with, and in that philia sense, you got to really be invested in them and the whole group performing at their best. And if you're a coach or a leader and you can feel comfortable using that word love or care, if you don't like I love you guys. I want you to perform at your best. I'm going to push you hard. I'm going to push you maybe too hard sometimes, but you got to stick with me because there's a plan here, right? And so, again, as a parent, I love my kids. They love me. I'm going to push them hard sometimes, right? And so I think sports, the reason kids play sports is to learn how to push themselves to be better. And I think it's really important that we have professional sports.
Two just real quick
Yeah,
thoughts and reflections that come up from this. Maybe you saw or others listening may have seen. So Mike Vrabel, he's the head football coach for the Patriots, and obviously they
right.
just go to the Super Bowl. And this is just one example, but I know there were others that have been referenced. But there was a popular story or a story that got some traction about at the beginning of the season, he did an exercise, kind of a team building exercise with their group, and it's built around it's called the four H's, and it was basically he created space for players to share. One, it's about their history, right? So like kind of their past and their journey. Two is their heroes, like people that they respect or inspired by, and so forth. Heartbreaks, so challenges that they've maybe overcome and adversity they've managed, and then also like their hopes, like their dreams and their aspirations. And I was like, what? It was such a I don't think, I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh, it's the reason why all of a sudden they had a amazing turnaround like that they did and they ended the Super Bowl. However, like I think again, your research and others, and I think a lot of anecdotal accounts, like we know like that connection is so valuable within a locker room setting. And I think just hearing some of the things that you're describing, I think it should just continue to reinforce how valuable it is to prioritize that, to carve out time and space. And again, doesn't mean that it all has to be completely structured and facilitated. And yet there are, to your point, ways in which you can do that. And so I think that was just one. Like I think this is, if there's any coach listening to this of like, hey, what would this look like? In a sporting lens, it's like, boom, I think here's maybe just one example. And then the other thing, I'm debating whether or not to say this because I'm about to say this publicly, but I will. So the point you brought up is that importance of particularly like in recovery. And I'm thinking about that in the context of not just like the physical recovery because of the demands of performance, but also Sue, like the recovery of the emotional labor that goes into the job, right? Like, okay, I'm picturing a player who doesn't perform in a big moment or, is struggling. And there's a lot of mental and emotional investment in that. And there's a lot of pain in that too. And that connection piece being very beneficial for them to help them in that response to that and like recover from that. Again, not just from a physical standpoint. So I had there's a colleague that I used to work with, and this is where I'm like, oh, this could be a little bit of a hot take per se, but like we were making the comment how in the sporting world, like the traditional culture was like after games, guys would get together and they would have drinks like in the locker room, like
Right.
usually there was a couple guys supplying all the liquor and everything, and we were talking about how like the culture's changed pretty dramatically. Like players, yes, players will still drink, but it's not nearly to the same frequency. But the thing that we were describing though is like not so much we're like, hey, like everybody needs to start drinking. That's not what we're advocating necessarily for. But what it did is it brought people together. And that's the piece of like, I don't know that in some cases we've replaced that because now it's like you go in the locker room and either people go their own way or they're on their phones and they're not getting into that connection and stuff. And so I think just as I listen to you, I've kind of had this like, man, we have to find a way to help bring people together. And I think again, some of your research I think is kind of highlighting that. So I
I summarize
appreciate
that
that.
in one sentence and give you
Please,
a real quick
please,
example. So I
way
would say,
yeah, way better than how I described
no,
it.
no, just to make it real simple, social connection is the macronutrient for emotional fitness. No social
Mm,
connection, you're not going to be emotionally healthy. Here's a quick example, which is, when my kids were little, like all, modern parents, we did the timeout when the kids were having whatever. And the more I thought about this neurobiologically, I'm like, oh, that's a terrible idea. You're a child, you're unhappy for whatever reason, you act out. And so we as adults go, oh, we don't like you anymore. We want to isolate you from the group. When you're having a bad time, I create the time in, which is you need to sit for as many minutes as you are old in my lap to be soothed when you're having a bad time. Work perfectly. So again, think of an athlete who doesn't perform well or an employee. They need a time in. They need more attention. Hey, you know what? You've missed your last two milestones, whatever those are. What can we do to turn this around? I need to sit with you and think about what's going on and be a friend and be a supporter as opposed to go, well, you suck. We don't want you on our team anymore. No, that's the word. Then you're going to degrade performance, right? So again, that's the sort of fear response. I'm gonna try to fear you into performing better, and that will work short term, perhaps, but it doesn't work long term, right? So anyway, think of the time in for people who are not doing so well.
I love that from a sporting lens, but also as a parent with a 2+ year old and
Oh,
a 5 month old. I'm gonna make a mental note of this one because I think that's I'm right there in that beautiful stage, beautiful chaos. So well, I've kept you longer than I intended, Paul, but I want to just again thank you greatly for your time and you taking some moments again. I shared earlier, like I think these conversations are probably some of those peak moments for me. And so I'm just grateful for you taking some time. Is there anything that I want to make sure if there's anything that you want to, we've already kind of talked about the app, but if like making sure that it's clear if people want to explore it or like learn a little bit more, any like best resources that I want to make sure that we can kind of guide people towards for that want
Thank
to
you.
learn more.
Thank you for asking. Yeah, tons of free stuff and free download at your6.com, your and the number 6.com, all kinds of blogs and scientific research. And just have that language to talk about emotional fitness is so important for humans of all types. So thank you, Zach, for having me on the Zach and Zach Show.